to the What Really Happened radio show. Because World War III is a really bad idea. Here is your host, Michael Rivero.
And aloha, America. Welcome to our show today. It's Thursday, February 5th, 2015. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. Sure happy it's Thursday. We have a lot of stuff to talk about today. Very little of it good, unfortunately. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645. 877-300-7645. Don is in our control room, twiddling the dials, keeping us out of trouble, ready to answer the phone when you call on in here. And obviously, top story is this rush to a new world war. There's really no other way to describe it. And starting off here with, we're seeing all over the media where the U.S. is out there saying Russia's aggression, Russia's evil, Russia's bad. You know, we hope they will seek the way of peace. And basically just this constant drumbeat to try and convince everybody that this is all somehow Russia's fault, even though the U.S. government admits spending $5 billion to overthrow Ukraine's government a year ago. And Obama's even on tape saying that, yes, they brokered the deal to change the government of Ukraine, which is not very democratic when you think about it. And it just created this whole mess. Kerry is out there saying U.S. won't close eyes to Russian aggression in Ukraine. There is no Russian aggression in Ukraine. This was all started by the United States a year ago with the coup d'etat against Ukraine's elected governments, one of the most blatant and obvious coups in history. Meanwhile, of course, all the war hawks in this country, in particular John McCain, are out there saying, we should arm Ukraine now, we should arm Ukraine now, we've got to support Ukraine's war. And it's a real shame they're not talking about using their own money or sending their own kids, because what they're really saying is, we're going to rob the American people of more money to buy weapons to give to our thug in Kiev. And get ready to send your kids if things really get out of control. And things are very much out of control. The bad news out of Ukraine is continuing. Apparently, the Ukrainian parliament, trying to deal with the fact that nobody is complying with this fourth mobilization, has just passed a law saying that anybody who refuses the mobilization, any deserters, can be shot. Just put them up against the pole and shoot them. It is an act of desperation. The U.S. didn't even do that during Vietnam. And even more telling, Kiev has just announced that the new mobilization for combat troops for eastern Ukraine includes women over the age of 20. And that is also a move of utter desperation, because when you're fighting a war, okay, and I know I'm going to get a lot of nasty emails from the feminists about this, but if you're thinking about a post-war economy, you know you need to rebuild your population as quickly as you can. And you don't put the authors of that next generation at risk. Unless you are to the point where you're just fighting for your survival, which seems to be what's going on here. Now, the U.S. is cranking up more sanctions against Russia because Russia's the bad guy. Remember, Russia's always the bad guy. And the top Russian official in charge of their defense industry is calling the new U.S. sanctions discriminatory, saying they're targeting companies in Russia that produce weapons that are better and less expensive than the American competition. So it's not about war, it's about protectionism. All righty, we have a caller on the line. I don't have a name or a location, but aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Is anybody on this line? Going once, going twice. I guess they hung up. All righty, another story coming out of Investment Watch blog. Russia's Foreign Minister Lukashevich is out there saying that once again they've caught the United States funding subversive activities against the Russian government. This is how the U.S. likes to play. They go into other countries, they topple the government, put in a government that's agreeable to Western banking interests. They've done it more than 50 times since the end of World War II, succeeding about half. And other countries don't like it when somebody comes in from outside and starts calling the shots. Also explains part of this backlash against Netanyahu speaking before Congress. It's not something people like. But remember, they only hate us for our freedoms. Blah, 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 blah. The top NATO commander warned today, any move to provide Ukraine with lethal weapons has to take into account a possible angry reaction from Russia. But of course, that's what the U.S. government wants. They're trying to provoke Russia into some kind of an overt act so they can start the war for real and blame Russia for it. And if Putin won't go along with that, they'll claim ISIS is in Moscow. Because that's the new excuse for U.S. war. Oh, ISIS is there. Let's gin up another little video here. They had some people set some more people on fire and just say they're in Russia, they're in Afghanistan, they're in India, they're in wherever the U.S. wants to invade, they'll just simply say, oh, those are ISIS over there, so we have a right to go declare war against them. I'm not the only one who's saying that. Over in Blacklisted News, they have an article, U.S. pushes for war in Europe. And yeah, it's very obvious, it's very heavy-handed. They don't even seem to care anymore if people are believing the propaganda or not. They're just going to say what their position is and start a major war that your sons and daughters will be expected to be killed and crippled in. For the greatness of America, and actually for the profitability of the private central bankers here. I was hoping to avoid this, because again, because those Russian defense industries are producing superior weapons at lower cost than their American counterparts, I don't think the U.S. can prevail in a conventional war against Russia or China, and that means it will go nuclear at some point. They might even just start with the nuclear weapons. We ended World War II with nuclear weapons. We may just start World War III with nuclear weapons. Article out of Russia Insider, and talking about how a former U.S. diplomat says that the reason the U.S. is going to send weapons into Kiev, and by the way, the U.S. is calling them defensive weapons. They're defensive weapons. Nobody's attacking Ukraine. Ukraine's doing the attacking. They're attacking the eastern breakaway republics. This former U.S. diplomat, and I somehow missed getting his name into the talking points list, but basically says the U.S. is sending the weapons into Kiev to force those wimps in the European Union into joining the war with Russia. And yeah, there are some very strong indications that Europe is starting to get real cold feet on this. Not the NATO organization. They're paid to make war. War means promotion. War means more money. But the European people, they're getting real cool on this whole idea about a new world war. Because the last two were fought on their front lawns. And they're seeing the third one being set up to be fought on their front lawns. And they're not very happy with that idea. I mean, be honest. Would you want World War III fought in your front yard? Probably not. It's really rough on the landscaping. Now, the United Nations is sounding a note of caution, saying that escalating the Ukraine conflict with more weapons will be a human catastrophe for over 5 million civilians who are going to be caught in the middle of all of this. And we already know Kiev has acknowledged they're deliberately targeting civilians in a campaign of cleansing the cities, genocide, ethnic cleansing, whatever you want to call it. And if Kiev gets their new weapons and they prevail, it will be a Pyrrhic victory, because in the process they've managed to destroy the industrial base in the eastern Ukraine that they needed to repay all these loans. Meanwhile, in the other war zones, plural, the U.S. military is starting to move more of their military assets into Iraq to fight ISIS. We're not making war on Iraq. We have to make war on ISIS. That's the new catch-all excuse for war anywhere. For all we know, ISIS is just 200 guys in a video production unit. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to our show here. And to recap what we were talking about before the commercial break, the U.S. is now moving military assets into Iraq to fight ISIS, nudge, nudge, wink, wink, say no more. ISIS is a fraud. They couldn't get Iraq to do anything that would justify invasion, can't get Syria to do anything to justify invasion. Remember that whole thing about, oh, Assad gassed his own people with sarin gas right in front of the UN chemical weapons inspectors. They understand the American people do not trust what the government is saying. They couldn't get somebody to do something, allowing an invasion. So now they've created this phony group called ISIS, which I think is, 200 guys and a video production team. And they make these horrific videos. And from then on, anytime the U.S. wants to invade somebody, oh, those are ISIS over there. Really, take our word for it. They're ISIS. And they go in and they attack. We're not really making war on Syria's infrastructure. We're not really making war on the people of Iraq who want their country back. They're ISIS. That's the scam. Needless to say, Vladimir Putin is trying to walk an extraordinarily fine line between not offering a provocation that the U.S. can seize on, but not being caught off guard either. And so Russia's nuclear ICBM mobile launchers are back on combat patrol. These are the big ones. That's how serious this is getting. All right, we're going to grab a phone call. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. You sound pretty good now. I was just going to give you a signal report.
I was getting emails on this thing, and apparently one of the studios at GCN, Studio 4, has some kind of a problem with their Skype hookup because they change studios and repatch, and my show comes through loud and clear. And I know my Skype setup is okay because I use it not only for GCN, but anytime I do a radio interview for other radio stations around the world, it's not a problem. So there's something glitchy with that one system. But listen, all you listeners, you could make donations to Genesis Communications, and I'm sure they would buy a new computer for studio number 4. Just something to think about.
It sounds like the audio equivalent of like pixelation that you'd see on a TV screen.
That's exactly what it is. It's overcompression. When the bandwidth drops down, Skype adjusts by increasing the compression, and that's what's going on there.
Right.
All right. Well, listen.
Yeah, okay.
Anything else?
All right, thank you.
All right. We're going to move over. We're to Peter in Los Angeles. Aloha, Peter. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, hi, Michael. I just would like to bring up, I'm not sure if you talked about it on your show because I haven't heard them all this week, but damn Eric Holder, one of my favorite guys. And, it's been at least apparent to me since even the JFK, when he appointed his brother as Attorney General, that the Attorney General position has been primarily about keeping the president and the executive free from any unwanted investigations or special counsels or whatever.
Well, I don't know. I don't know. Let me insert something here. I don't know about Robert Kennedy. I mean, the Kennedys were trying to establish a dynasty of 3 presidents in a row: John, Bobby, and then Teddy, which was very angering to the GOP, who had other ambitions. But certainly we saw during the senior Bush administration, when they were trying to defend themselves from the Iran-Contra investigation, certainly during Clinton with Janet Reno, and since that period, yes, the Attorney General's primary job has been to run legal interference for the administration.
Well, I disagree with you. I think it goes back at least to Bobby, but whatever. But what I can tell you for sure is that Eric Holder, I think you'll agree with this, has taken this to a completely new level. And I love the fact that he just got offered a $77 million per year plus bonuses to work for J.P. Morgan Chase for not having prosecuted anybody for LIBOR, the derivatives, mortgage fraud, on and on and on and on, fixing the markets, all the fraud that they've done. Nobody's gone to jail at all. And for that $77 million a year, J.P. Morgan Chase has bought all the dirt and all the investigation that they didn't do, and all the dirt on the congressman and the president that he covered up, so that the banks can get even more, more than the $20 trillion they've already gotten.
Hey, corruption pays big bucks in the United States of America. Everybody else is screaming about minimum wage, but if you want to make money, just sell out to the bankers.
I'm telling you,
will be taken care of.
I'm telling you, and become a politician. And I think it's like a 12,000% increase in his salary.
It's a lot of money. It's a lot of money. $77 million, boy. I'm not going to live long enough where I could spend that kind of money, but I'm sure he'll make the effort of it. Anything else?
I mean, no. But I just wanted to hear what you thought about that, about the $77 million and J.P. Morgan and all that stuff.
I wish it was a unique story, but it isn't. We're, going back, we see all of these top government officials who ran interference for various corporations or handed contracts. I mean, it's almost a joke at the Pentagon. These officers in charge of military procurement will hand these gigantic contracts off to defense contractors, and then they'll retire from military service at full pension, and they'll land special consulting jobs with those same defense contractors for huge amounts of money. It's been going on for decades, and everybody seems to think that this is okay, but no, it isn't. It's why the money power has bought control of this country to the detriment of its people, the nation itself, its infrastructure, and certainly its moral and ethical standing in the world.
Well, I absolutely agree, Mike, and it's emblematic of just how screwed up this country is. This Holder thing is like the poster child for that. But anyway, thank you so much.
All right, thank you, and we're going to try and fit in one more call before the commercial break. Lockie in Arizona, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hey, Mike. Here at work, I don't have a lot of time myself, but, it's just frustrating talking to the people at work. And, everything is upside down. I can't get through to hardly anybody. I mean, I have personal friends that are graduates and with law degrees and, go to Stanford and Oxford and the placards on the wall. But, you try to explain to them something about vaccinations and the system. For example, as far as I know, only the vaccinated people were getting sick, and with the measles, the children, and then they blame it on the unvaccinated kids. It just makes no sense to me. And then you got, the only ones who are serving time are whistleblowers. I mean, the thing's so upside down, but you try to explain it to these people, like I said, that went through these institutions. I have no idea what they're teaching in these. So thank God I never went, to one of these places.
No, I understand how that works here. And listen, we got to take a break for commercials. I'm going to respond to what you said when we come back from these words from our sponsors. So thank you for the phone call, and stay tuned. We'll be right back. America, welcome back to the show here. And responding to that last phone call, there's a couple of overlapping phenomenon going on. When I was a kid, back during the last Great Ice Age, and you went to a college or university, it was sort of held up as a forum for the free exploration of new ideas. That was then, this is now. And modern universities are really about enforcing the accepted official dogma. They've become very rigid. And the process of getting a college degree today basically consists of reassuring your professors that you will perpetuate whatever beliefs they have given you. Human caused global warming, the Big Bang. Now, we know that a large number of Americans are very aware of what's gone wrong with this country. But there are still Americans who are very much in denial. They don't want to know. They've got good lives, good salaries, they don't want to get in trouble. And they're falling into the good German syndrome. We name it that because we saw the same phenomenon going on in Nazi Germany. There were people who knew the country was heading to disaster, the Order of the White Rose, for example. But the good Germans were those who said, I don't want to see it, I don't want to hear about it, I'm going to do my job, and if I don't cause trouble for the government, nothing bad will happen to me. Which, of course, turned out to be completely and utterly wrong. Because when the Nazis led Germany off that cliff, everybody got dragged along, good and bad. Now, apparently, even though it is a plausible story, the story about Holder getting this hugely remunerative job for J.P. Morgan appears to have started with a satire, and it may not be real, but I'm sure that Mr. Holder will be well taken care of now that he's retired from public life. All righty, we're going to go back to the phones here. Dustin in New Jersey, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Yeah, good German syndrome until you see the mushroom clouds popping up all over the place. Huh?
Oh, man, don't get me started. Last night, I didn't get any sleep till about midnight because here on Oahu there were these very loud but distant explosions, which I'm assuming were disposal of old ordnance. They're cleaning out the lockers to get the new ordinance in, and obviously it's not something you can throw in the landfills or just dump into the ocean. So they were setting it off, and it was a little unnerving to hear in the distance.
Hey, remember that movie by Dawn's Early Light when you had the Secretary of the Interior taking over because they couldn't find the president? They thought he might have been dead. And you get like a nut job and some nut job generals, and that's all you need.
Well, yeah, absolutely. I forget where exactly in the order of succession the Secretary of the Interior comes. It's President, Vice President, Speaker of the House, and then I'm not sure where after that the Secretary of the Interior would come in. But I think if you've lost that much of the government, you've already lost the war.
Hey, talking about, us giving defensive weapons to the Ukraine, that's one thing, but, you have to train these people, and where are they going to find the people if they're all just, deserting?
Well, there's all those mercenaries that are already in Ukraine that we're not supposed to know about, but we've got videos of them speaking American English, British English. Some of them are wearing U.S. military patches. They're already trained up. And I'm sure that they're going to be put in positions of command of these newly conscripted brigades of young Ukrainian men, and now apparently the young Ukrainian women as well. That's probably going to cause some problems as well. And yeah, they're just going to be led to the slaughter.
Well, I see wretched governments, and some people like Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, they're part of the problem too. They're so angry at Russia from the past. They're willing to align themselves with fascists basically, and I mean, don't they realize they're the first ones to get hit?
Well, more and more of them are starting to, and I'm going to talk about that here in just a little bit. But what is holding NATO and Europe together is less hostility over things that happened in the past, and more the fact that their economies are hopelessly entangled with the U.S. dollar and they can't break free. Greece is about to. That's why everybody's in a panic about that. But as long as those European economies are tangled up with the U.S. dollar, whatever the U.S. wants in terms of war, Europe's going to get dragged along too. But we're seeing signs of cold feet, like that earlier article from Russia Insider describing the European Union wimps who have to be driven to war with Russia by the United States.
Well, Greece is a wild card because, they have NATO. They can... if there's an attack on, if we attack Russia somehow and they attack a NATO country, Greece can veto that.
Greece also has a veto in the European Union for sending weapons into Ukraine, which apparently they were going to exercise. But Germany already said, we're not going to go along with that. Merkel was supposed to meet with Obama in Washington. She canceled the trip and said, no way, Jose. And now we're hearing that Merkel and Holland are on their way to Russia to meet with Putin about finding some kind of a peaceful solution to Ukraine. So what we're seeing here is the war hawks want war because they're comfortably here in the United States of America and they don't have to look at the bloodshed. But those people in Europe, they're waking up and realizing what they're risking. They're talking to their elderly who were there for big mistake number 2, who are telling them, you don't want to do this. And they're starting to listen.
Is Holland bringing his ship?
I don't know about that. Okay?
All right, thanks, Mike.
All right, going to let you go. Thank you for the phone call here. Now, article over in Global Research up in Canada. NATO meeting in Brussels heightens danger of war with Russia. And it's talking about how all these NATO defense ministers are up there rattling their sabers as hard as they can. And we're actually seeing a schism start to open up between NATO, which is funded to create and fight wars, and the rest of Europe, which is saying, we'd really appreciate it if you'd go fight this next world war someplace else. Like maybe down in the Australian outback. Nobody's using that land anyway. Go down and have all the fun you want killing each other. But this meeting between Merkel and Holland with Putin, I think it's sending a signal that the member states of the European Union are taking a good, hard look at just how close this is to blowing up into a full-on, real world war on their territory one more time. And it's easy to forget the world wars here in the United States of America unless you live someplace like here on Oahu where I can look out and see the remains of the Arizona from my window. But when you're in Europe, and I saw this when I worked in Europe back in the 1980s, the remains of the World War II destruction, it's still there. It's still not all repaired. Or it wasn't back in the 1980s. I remember there was one area in Munich that was still walled off because there was an unexploded gargantuan bomb in there, and they just didn't even dare go in and demolish it and try and rebuild. They just said, we're going to wall it off until it either blows up or we know for certain that it can't anymore. And it's all over. The scars are all over. You can still see the remains of the World War I trenches in the French countryside. For them, it's immediate history, family history. And I am not surprised to see more and more people in Europe coming out and saying, no, not a third time, not on our territory. Now, down in Greece, it is the wild card out there. Thousands and thousands of anti-European Central Bank protesters are in Athens in a huge rally of support for Syriza, saying, get us out of the ECB, get us out of the Euro, get us out of the European Union. Now, the ECB is taking a very hard stance, and they just did something that I think was very reckless and ill-considered, because the European Central Bank is now saying they will no longer accept Greek bonds as collateral for any more funding. It's a hard-line approach. They're basically saying you either agree to pay all the debt that we arranged for you to be suffering under, or we're not going to loan you any more at all. How do you like them apples? This could backfire because Russia's already offering Greece financial aid with no strings attached. More about Greece when we come back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about events going on in Greece. We're talking about a very heavy-handed move by the European Central Bank to simply say, we will not accept Greek bonds as collateral for any more future loans to you unless you agree to pay back all the debt that we created for you, especially through that underhanded deal between Goldman Sachs and Papandreou. They're taking a very, very hard line and upping the ante. The president of the Euro Parliament is saying Greece risks national bankruptcy. And Greece replied, we're already bankrupt. And so here's the situation. The European Union, the European Central Bank, the IMF, the World Bank, the Troika, if you will, are forced to take a hard line with Greece. Because if they cut Greece any slack, every other member nation of the European Union is going to want discounts or renegotiation of the debt. And the European Central Bank worked very hard and corrupted a lot of politicians to get all of Europe in their clutches, to squeeze and squeeze and squeeze. So they are in a position where they can't cut any slack for Greece, including the odious debt. And this, too, is going to give Greece reason to start looking very seriously at Russia's overtures. And that is really going to upset the Western powers. They've been trying to encircle Russia, grab more and more land, bring it into the European Union. That's what all that fight about Ukraine was. Ukraine was buddy-buddy with Russia. No, we'll overthrow the government, we'll drag it into the European Union, and then we're closer to Russia and we can sneer at them. All of a sudden, if Greece flips sides and cozies up to Russia the way Ukraine was trying to do when their government was overthrown, what do? Overthrow the government of Ukraine, of Greece? Probably. But this hardline position by the European Union and the European Central Bank is going to be forcing Greece out of the EU. And looking at that situation being offered by Russia, drop of the food export ban and financial assistance. Now, interestingly enough, Deutsche Bank is not optimistic. They think the departure of Greece is inevitable and that Europe is starting to break apart, back to being the European nations. And it does look like it. We're seeing all kinds of signs of wavering support for the U.S. war agenda, wavering support for the U.S. economic agenda. Over at King World News, they were interviewing Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, who's out there basically saying that, in his view, it is now likely that the new Greek government will be assassinated because there's so much money on the line The private central bankers' dominion over Europe is at risk. And these bankers and governments, they play for keeps. I'm surprised they didn't try and shoot Tsipras out of the election before he won. And maybe they were just convinced that they were going to be able to steal this last election the way they stole the previous one, and they miscalculated. But I hope all those people in the new Greek government are wearing their Kevlar undies, because they have got targets on them right now. Those bankers never let a debt slave go. If you have not read my article, All Wars Are Bankers' Wars, you'd better catch up. There'll be a pop quiz next class. All right, story out of thehill.com, and it's also been all over the corporate media, was even mentioned on the SRN Newsbreak. Obama is getting ready to go to Congress for a war authorization against ISIS. This is a carte blanche for war anywhere on the globe. All they have to do is say, ISIS is in here, and invade. Oh, we're not really at war with Syria or Iraq or Libya, but we have to go in there and get rid of ISIS, and in the process overthrow and replace the government. That's the new scam. I'm starting to think that there's really only about 200 guys in ISIS total, and a video production unit, and that's it. They're a made-up enemy the way Al-Qaeda was, to give the U.S. an excuse to just invade whatever country they wanted to do, and now Obama is asking Congress for a carte blanche to simply declare war against any country on earth, just by saying, ooh, ISIS is in there. ISIS is in Iran. ISIS is in Moscow. ISIS is in Paris. ISIS is in London and Berlin and Tokyo. It's open-ended war by the United States against a manufactured bullseye being taped on anybody they want to invade. Because, I mean, seriously, if the government were to stand up and give you the real reason for all these wars of conquest, you know, we need to force these people to work with our financial system and use our currency and sell their resources only for the dollar, no American is going to sacrifice their son or daughter for a war of conquest that benefits the bankers. History has shown, without exception, every ruler that initiates a war has to lie and trick and deceive their people into it. With Hitler, it was the Gleiwitz incident and the Reichstag fire. With the U.S., it's 9/11 and ISIS. Now, apparently, Damascus, Syria woke up to massive rocket attacks which are being blamed on ISIS. But we shouldn't be too sure about that, because we have seen the anti-ISIS airstrikes take out key parts of Syria's infrastructure, oil refineries, storage yards, pipelines. Critical economic infrastructure of Syria is being bombed and destroyed to harm Bashar al-Assad, always under the excuse about, oh, there was an ISIS person standing on top of it. And everybody's out there saying, oh yes, war is good for business, we should do that. And war is never good for business, by the way. Because all the money that is created to fight these wars is a loan that 100 years of future generations will work to pay off with accruing interest. Okay, we're going to grab one more phone call before the top of the hour. I think this is John in Barbados, is it?
Yep.
Oh, okay. We had some aloha. We had some strange characters in the Comrex stack here. What's on your mind?
Well, I'm looking at all these goings on in the Middle East and Ukraine and what have you. All these wars. There's nothing certain that any nation will stick with the U.S. on this, particularly in Europe.
Yes. And
I for one, am absolutely fed up to the back teeth with America and its constant wars. Ever since 1776, there's only been 4 years when you've never been at war with someone.
That's a pretty disgusting record. And, you know, and the irony of that is, of course, that Iran has not invaded and attacked another country in a war of aggression in over 200 years, and yet we're supposed to think they're the bad guys. They're the threat to world peace.
Well, what I would say to Mr. Obama, Britain is not going to go with you, and we do have nuclear weapons, boy. Watch your step.
I do not see the U.S. and Britain getting into an outright war, but I think we might see Britain's already talking about leaving the EU, and Britain might just step back and say, look, we're neutral in this one. Which doesn't mean they wouldn't be covertly involved, but, you know, I don't see us getting into an adversarial situation with the United Kingdom.
Well, the problem I see, whenever America has gone to war without its main ally of Britain, they've lost. They lost in Vietnam. They didn't really win in the Second Gulf War or Afghanistan. And there were just token presence of Britain in those last two. I think it's totally ridiculous. It's nonsense. And I hope Greece does pull out of the EU. And,
I certainly hope for that last one as well. I hope for the last one as well. I think the dynamics of war in the 21st century, because of the increase in mobility across the planet, I don't think the same circumstance applies today that applied back during World War II between the United States and Great Britain. So it's a different field of play, so to speak.
Well, I think with today's modern missile technology, America will not escape.
Yeah, that is certainly definitely true, especially since our entire ballistic missile defense system is now hopelessly obsolete. We got to take a break for the news. Thank you for the phone call, John, and we'll be back after these few words. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 2. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. And before we take our next phone call, Fox News, during our news break, was running a story about how the head of the FBI says ISIS is already here in the United States of America. Lone wolf terrorists. They don't use the phones and the internet, so we can't find them with the NSA, and we have to be... Basically, they're justifying saying they're going to make war on any American who doesn't do what they're told to do. They're really cranking the stuff up. I got a couple of emails from a listener who is in Russia saying that it's common knowledge around where they live that if you're digging a little too deep in your gardens, you will still find unexploded World War II munitions. This is local history for the people of Europe and of Russia. It's easy for Americans to forget about the two world wars unless you go up to the military graveyards or you live here above Pearl Harbor. All righty, we're going to go back to the telephones here. We're going to go to Steve in Massachusetts. Aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. I want to talk about the measles, and there's been a huge scare lately, and I know for a while there's been a huge amount of people getting away from the mRNA vaccine because it's been said to have been linked to possibly autism.
Mm-hmm.
And do you think this latest outbreak was intentionally introduced by the medical industry in order to put the scare into people because they realize a lot of people are getting away?
I think a lot of illnesses have been brought into this country with this open borders policy. I mean, scabies, actual one case of plague, swine flu, and yes, measles, and the medical industrial complex is simply taking advantage of that to say, oh, there's a new disease out in the land, let's sell all kinds of vaccines. But, what's really interesting about all this scare, it's already turning into be a repeat of the 1976 swine flu debacle, because the reality is nobody has died of the measles in the United States in the last 10 years, going back to when it was considered eradicated. But there are over 100 deaths that are attributed to the measles vaccine. So we're already in a situation where the vaccine for measles is killing more people than the measles does.
It's funny, I don't hear that in the news.
Yeah, funny how that works, doesn't it? Because, all those big news channels, they get these huge, very expensive commercials from big pharmaceutical corporations, and then they get the second commercial from the ambulance-chasing law firm saying, if you took that last medication, you're entitled to a cash settlement. It's just all churned by the money, everybody grabbing the money.
Yeah, it's just the drum beats are really beating loud this time. And
they really are, and we're going to be talking about that a little bit more further on in the show, okay?
All right. Well, thanks, Mike.
All right. Thank you very much for the phone call here. Now, before we get back to the hard news, I want to reprise something I said a while ago, and I put the article up on the front page of whatreallyhappened.com, and it's titled, So You Think Military Intervention is a Good Idea? And it doesn't matter whether it's Syria or Iraq or Russia or Ukraine or wherever. This is something that all Americans need to read, so please copy it off and send it everywhere you can. And it's something you have to have the courage to say. Anytime somebody like a John McCain gets up there and says, we've got to go to war in XYZ, say, well, if you really feel that strongly about it, here's your rifle, here's your parachute. We ran out of the desert camo, but here's a bright day-glow orange jumpsuit left over from the CIA's torture centers. Watch your head climbing into that transport plane, and we'll call whoever it is you're telling us needs to be invaded this week and tell them you are on your way to kick their butts all by yourself. But we, the American people, are now aware of the huge number of wars started with lies, fraud, and deception. The USS Maine blew up, according to her own captain, from an onboard fire. President McKinley and the Hearst newspaper said, oh, it was a Spanish mine, and they used it to trick you, the American people, into the Spanish-American War. The Lusitania was smuggling weapons of war to Britain, even though the United States was technically neutral. Germany knew this. They took out ads in the New York papers saying, do not book passage on the Lusitania. She's a target of war. And the Lusitania was sent into an area without escorts where the U-boats were known to be clustered. And she was sunk, and the American paper said, oh, innocent lives, innocent civilian passenger ship, and used that to fan up support among the American people to go into World War I. Now, divers entered the hold of the Lusitania in 2008 and confirmed it was, in fact, carrying a military cargo. It was a legitimate target of war, and the U.S. and British governments deliberately sent those passengers to their deaths to create a cause for war. We know because of documents declassified in 1994, Pearl Harbor was not only not a surprise, but Roosevelt spent all of 1941 goading the Japanese to attack, following an 8-step plan created by Office of Naval Intelligence Lieutenant Commander Arthur H. McCollum. When the USS Maddox reported she was under torpedo attack, Johnson used that to escalate the war in Vietnam, even though the Maddox's captain immediately reported that it was a false report. They had an inexperienced sonar operator who heard his own ship's propellers and screamed, oh, it's a torpedo! Anything to move the agenda forward. And we all remember Saddam's nuclear weapons of mass destruction. So why should we take anything being said by the U.S. government and the corporate media at face value today, including that horrific burning of the Jordanian pilot? Because we don't know who actually did that, just who we're supposed to blame. And yes, government set all the passengers on the Lusitania to their deaths to start a war. Roosevelt sacrificed 3 ships and thousands of sailors here in Pearl Harbor to get you to go to war. So yeah, it's trivial to burn up one guy to get you to go to war. Remember the lies about the stolen incubators that tricked you into the second invasion of Iraq? I'm sorry, the first invasion of Iraq. I'm losing count. Saddam's nuclear weapons was the second invasion of Iraq. ISIS is the lie for the third invasion of Iraq. And I think we, the American people, just need to stand up, have the courage to say, we think you're lying again. If you want to make war on this other country, you go. Spend your own money, send your own children. We're not having any part of it. We've been made a fool of too many times by this government and this corporate media to buy into this now. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. Anyway. Now, there's still a big Sturm und Drang about Bibi Netanyahu's proposed speech before the U.S. Congress, and it appears to be backfiring rather horribly. And Netanyahu appears to have overplayed his hand, because the big push in Congress was more sanctions against Iran, even though Iran is complying with the P5+1 preliminary agreement. They have kept all their promises, and the U.S. promised to lower sanctions, didn't keep it. Now they're trying to put more on there. Anything to destroy the possibility of a peaceful resolution because they want a war, which you will pay for and your children will bleed for. That's what they want. So Congress was kind of hesitating on this whole Iran sanctions thing. So John Boehner invites Netanyahu over to rally the congressional forces to bring us closer to war with Iran. And it's backfiring horribly because it's one thing for members of Congress to take AIPAC's money and do what Israel wants when the voters aren't looking. But Netanyahu just rubbed the American people's noses in the fact that Israel is in control of the U.S. Congress, and members of Congress are rebelling against that. More about this when we come back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show. We're talking about Bibi Netanyahu and how he may have made a huge blunder by working with John Boehner to get a chance to lecture the U.S. Congress about the need for war with Iran. The Israeli ambassador said it's a sacred duty for Netanyahu to tell the Congress who to make war on. And it's put a lot of members of Congress in a very difficult spot because it's one thing to be taking money from AIPAC for your campaigns and then very quietly voting Israel's agenda through in the Congress, and quite another to have a public display of Israel's leader telling Congress what to do on national television, rubbing the American people's noses in the fact that a foreign government calls the shots in Washington, D.C. And a lot of Democratic members of Congress who were sort of on the fence about new Iran sanctions have now come off the fence right on the side of the White House, which doesn't want to escalate the situation at this point. And so support for new sanctions for Iran is actually in decline right now. So, raising on a busted flush, Israeli Ambassador Dermer and Knesset Speaker Edelstein are rushing to Capitol Hill, trying to say, no, this is all fine. You should be proud that you're doing Israel's will, and spending American tax money and American lives to do what Israel tells you to do. And I think they've created a huge problem. And it almost goes back to that comment that was made by Ariel Sharon some years ago, where he got up in the Knesset and he was trying to quell some concern in the Knesset about a heavy-handed control of the United States government. And Ariel Sharon, and this was reported on Kol Yisrael Radio, Ariel Sharon said, "Don't worry about it. We, the Jewish people, control America, and the Americans know it." Well, Ariel Sharon was wrong. Most Americans didn't know it. Now they do. And they're looking at all these wars and all this money that's been given to Israel and all of these horrible war crimes and atrocities Israel commits with the money that we give them. And it's not sitting very well. And there's starting to see a backlash. There's an interesting article over at Veterans Today saying it's time for Netanyahu to be investigated for nuclear weapons tech smuggling because Israel has been caught doing that. Israel has nuclear weapons. They've got a bomb factory hidden. Well, it's not really hidden anymore. We all know it's there. In fact, there was even a show on Israeli television showing the bomb factory underneath the Dimona reactor, the one that was leaked to the British press all those years ago. They got a bomb factory, and they have been caught selling or trying to sell clandestine nuclear weapons to the government of South Africa, the former government. When the new government came in and they started looking at the records, they said, "Oh, look at this. We have these little love notes between the former government of South Africa and Israel about buying and selling nuclear weapons." Now, at the very least, under U.S. law, there should be no more of our money going to Israel, because under the Symington Amendment to the Foreign Appropriations Act and under the Glenn Act, it is illegal for the U.S. government to send any financial and especially military support to any nation in possession of nuclear weapons technology that refuses to sign the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and allow IAEA inspections. You remember that first press conference Obama had as president And Helen Thomas, who was like a permanent fixture in the White House press corps, got up and put Obama on the spot. What nations in the Middle East have nuclear weapons right now? And, of course, Obama put on his tap shoes and danced around the question. We view nuclear proliferation as tremendously serious. And the next day, Helen Thomas was gone. The U.S. government knows Israel has nuclear weapons. They know where they got the first round of fissionables from here in the United States of America. They know they're committing a crime under U.S. law to send your tax money to Israel. But they're going to go on doing it because every election cycle, AIPAC is out there with checkbooks full of your tax dollars to help their campaigns. It's a giant kickback scheme is what it is. And this article in Veterans Today is saying now's the time for every American to stand up and clamor about everything Israel's done. Attack on the USS Liberty, 9/11, constant sucking of money from us, the Israeli spy scandal. And before I take this phone call, I want to share something with you. And this is something else you should have the courage to say in public, social media, everywhere. No government can serve two masters. And a government that serves Israel cannot, does not, and will not serve the American people. A friend of Israel is no friend of America. I think every member of the U.S. government who declares they're a friend of Israel ought to be loaded onto a plane and flown there, nonstop, one way, never allowed back. Because in these dark times, America needs leaders who are going to put America first, second, and third. We're going to go to the phones here. Casey in Phoenix, aloha, welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Oh, no, I was just calling because yesterday I was listening to the podcast from yesterday and you were talking about staging things like the thing for killing people or beheading people and all that sort of thing. And it came to me that I think it's all directed. I think actors doing all kinds of stuff. I'm not saying they don't kill people because they don't care about people.
Well, in this last one, I think they really did burn some guy alive for the shock value.
Oh, yeah.
And, you know,
I don't doubt that.
But yeah, I mean, ISIS could be no more than a couple of hundred guys in a video production unit. You know, to look.
It would take that many guys.
You know, and then anywhere the U.S. wants to invade. We know ISIS is in there on the ground, so we're not making war against that country and its people, just against ISIS. But of course, for the people on the ground in that country, the bombs are still hitting their important infrastructure.
Well, it's not like they've never done it before. I mean, you know, those fake newscasts with what was the guy who was bombing? I can't remember what guy it was. That guy's still in the news field, though.
Yeah.
And during Desert Storm or whatever. You know. So, yeah, that's all I'm going to say. Just hitting the nail on the head is a good thing.
Okay.
So keep going.
All right. I certainly will do that. Thank you very much for the phone call. We're coming up here on another commercial break here. Now, the backlash against Israel, Israel's grip on the United States is weakening. We can see it. They just slipped badly with the Congress. They're not able to control the media as much. And now we're hearing a report. This is out of Electronic Intifada. Dozens of European parliamentarians are calling for an end to the EU-Israel treaty because of what Israel has been doing in Gaza and the West Bank. The EU doesn't want to be seen as supporting violations of human rights and war crimes. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show. I'm looking at this story. It's been sent to me several times now about how Putin has autism. Well, that's what he gets for using American vaccines. Gosh darn it, he should know better than that. All righty, let's talk about the economy. Now, the stock market's doing really well. Has been for the last few days. Makes absolutely no sense whatsoever for the stock market to be doing well with all the bad earnings reports and everything. It's being rigged. Of course it's being rigged. The whole thing is a scam to make the people who are rich richer and to make you poorer so that you have no choice but to do what you're told to do by people who've got stacks of that ink and paper stuff to wag at you. Now, we've been talking in recent weeks about the decline in the Baltic Dry Index. Last March, it was at 1,600. Today it's below 600. More than a 50% drop. And as an inevitable result, bulk shipping companies who don't have the volume of material to ship that they used to are starting to slip into bankruptcies. Today, the Baltic Dry Index was at 564. It's getting close to the all-time historic low of 554 set in July of 1986. And the Baltic Dry Index is a very reliable indicator of future trends in the economy, especially the consumer economy. And adding more to that, and this is especially a problem for us here in Hawaii, apparently the West Coast port worker talks have broken down. And so there are going to be serious supply chain issues regarding cargo that's shipping into or out of those West Coast ports. The whole system's starting to show cracks all over the place here. Now, I'm going to once again mention this lawsuit, the Comer lawsuit up in Canada. And to recap on that, when the Bank of Canada was granted its charter by the Canadian government, it included a provision that loans by that central bank to the national, provincial, and municipal governments of Canada would be interest-free. So far, so good. In 1974, the Bank of Canada just threw that away and started charging interest on the money being loaned to the government in order to loot wealth from the Canadian people. Now, Comer and some other individuals filed a lawsuit in 2011 in Canada's federal court to force the restoration of the Bank of Canada back to its original chartered purpose and rules. And so far, the courts have been agreeing because that was the rules. Now, the reason I'm repeating this story again today, and we'll probably do so tomorrow, is because we are now getting a report out of Investment Watch Blog and other sources that the government of Canada has now ordered Canadian media not to report on this story and not to report on the fact that the federal level courts have ruled against the Bank of Canada on this. And this confirms emails we were getting from Canadian listeners and readers yesterday saying that the links we provided to this story on whatreallyhappened.com were being blocked in Canada. They do not want the Canadian people to understand that the private bank in Canada has not been playing by the rules, that it bent the rules to loot wealth from the Canadian taxpayers and put in their pocket. Now, the immense wealth of these private central bankers, and remember, it's estimated that the Rothschild family is worth $15 trillion. When you see that list of world's richest people and Bill Gates is up there, his wealth is pocket change. The super wealthy go out of their way to not appear on those lists because then people start scratching their heads and say, how did they get that kind of money? Well, they got it from a very simple mechanism. They take control of a nation's currency by bribing the politicians, and then they start issuing all of the nation's currency as a loan at interest. They just create it out of thin air. It's ink and paper, numbers in a computer. And this simple scam guarantees immense wealth to the bankers and perpetual debt slavery to the people. Canada's central bank was created with the requirement that loans to the government for infrastructure development were interest-free, so the taxpayers weren't paying interest on this instantly created money. But after 1974, the Bank of Canada said, we'll charge interest. We're going to just take money from anybody. And the lawsuit is valid. It rests on a valid point of the bank's charter. And the private central bankers are in a panic because they don't like to lose money. They really do believe that all the money in the world actually does belong to them, and you're only allowed to borrow it at interest. And they're in a panic about this. The idea of an interest-free loan for the improvement of the country? What a ridiculous idea. And the reason they don't want this story to get out is very simple, because other nations with private central banks are going to say, well, why aren't we running it with the Canadian model to reduce the taxpayer burden? I mean, obviously the taxpayers will pay back the principal on that loan, but why are we paying interest on money that's created out of thin air? And this ties in with a question that I keep asking everybody to think about. Every time you hear about another debate in Congress about raising the debt ceiling, should we raise it, should we not? It's a false argument, because the real question is, why, when the United States Constitution authorizes the federal government in Washington, D.C. to create and issue a debt-free currency, why does Washington, D.C. persist in borrowing created out of thin air currency from a privately owned central bank at interest, plunging the people into hopelessly unpayable debt? And there's really only one answer. It's the greed of the private central bankers, aided by the complicity of a hopelessly corrupt political system. There's no justification to allow a private central bank to be in control of the national currency as a privatized for-profit endeavor. This nation fought a revolution to break free of that kind of predatory bank behavior, only to be sold back into that slavery, not once, but 3 times, by corrupted Congresses and corrupted presidents. And there have been American leaders who stood up against it, like Andrew Jackson and John F. Kennedy, and the Congress of 1811, which voted to kill the charter for the first bank of the United States. But it doesn't matter how many trillions of dollars the private central bankers have. It doesn't matter what kind of palaces they're living in right now. It's still not enough. They want it all. And they'll do anything it takes to keep the world enslaved to this fraudulent system of banking. And they're trying to shut down this lawsuit in Canada. They're trying to bring Greece to heel. But it's too late. The people of planet Earth recognize this system of banking doesn't benefit the people and the nation. It benefits the bankers. They're not loaning anything with any real value. The ink and paper is supported by your belief. You've been brainwashed to think that piece of ink and paper is worth something. It isn't. It's a few pennies of paper and a few pennies of ink, and that's it. They're loaning your own belief back to you at interest. Got to take another break for commercials. We'll be right back. Oh, hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And I must have said something that annoyed somebody, because my web server is now under a denial of service attack. They are such childish people out there, really. Okay. I just got an email from somebody up in Canada saying that they went out and tried some of the links to the story about the lawsuit regarding the central bank, and yes, they are all being blocked, or the articles have been deleted. So those of you in Canada who think that you are free from the evils that have gripped the United States of America, wrong. Getting on back to the economy here. Yesterday, the CEO of the Gallup polling organization came out and said this claim of a 5.6 unemployment number is nonsense. In fact, he called it the big lie. And got a lot of coverage. I mean, we've all been out here in the independent media saying it's a hoax all along. There are more than 93 million Americans willing and able to work who have not been able to find a job. It's created a huge stink with all these H-1B visas for foreigners to come on in because they're better trained. Our schools don't educate people anymore. They indoctrinate. Plus the problem of all these amnestied illegals showing up on the unemployment lines. Well, apparently, Jim Clifton, this CEO from Gallup, is now out there saying apparently he has been receiving threats. And he came out and he's telling his associates he might suddenly disappear for questioning the U.S. jobs data. Because it's one thing for somebody in the independent media to say they're lying about that 5.6 number. Because Washington, D.C. assumes nobody's listening to me. But when the head of Gallup says it, that's a big problem. And apparently he got the nasty phone call the other night. Alrighty, so, taking care of my server here. Now, we're still looking at the aftermath of this announcement by the Obama White House to normalize relations with Cuba. And a lot of people are for it. A lot of people are against it, especially those hardliners at the CIA and the remains of Batista's government living in Miami. They know how to carry a grudge for half a century. And for lovers of the finer things in life, of course, it opens up the possibility of Cuban rum and Cuban cigars once again being available in the United States. And I will grant Canada this, you guys have got Cuban rum and Cuban cigars, because you don't go along with this embargo thing, but it's been here in the U.S. Well, unfortunately, it's not going to come to pass because apparently 36 members of Congress have sponsored a bill, House Resolution 662, to protect America's cigar manufacturers against foreign competition. So even though the embargo itself might be gone, we can't have Cuban cigars in here. They might actually sell better than our own. You know, when I was a kid, this idea of protectionism, you rarely heard about it. We didn't need it. America made the best of everything on planet Earth, and other nations scrambled to buy what we were selling. And as our manufacturing declined over the last 30 years and our products became inferior and more expensive, foreign manufacturers tried to come in here. Some succeeded, like Toyota, Nissan, but a lot of them were just blocked. The U.S. government took the attitude of, we're not going to revive manufacturing in American quality. We'll just pass laws to keep out products that are better than ours. And they're continuing to do that. All righty, we're going to take another phone call here. Joe in California. Aloha, Joe. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi. Thank you for taking my call. You were talking about the quality of manufacturing and so on and so forth, as well as the banks.
Yes.
And I just wanted to say that program that you put on YouTube, that All Wars Are Bankers' Wars.
Yes.
And when you listen to that information, and then they had a guest 2 or 3 nights ago on Coast to Coast AM, and the topic that evening was CIA secret alliances. And when you hear that guy speak and listen to you speak, it sounds like you're reading from the same information.
No, we're just looking at the real world. There's going to be a lot of overlap because we're looking at the real world. There was a revelation. Some of these top bank executives were recruited by the CIA to run their banks, again, not for the benefit of the American people, but for covert activity. And there's nothing new about this because banks were being used as instruments of U.S. foreign policy in Central and South America back in the 1970s and 1980s, where they would go down to the government of some South American country and they would loan them money, and then the CIA would go in and engage in crop destruction or industrial sabotage so the country couldn't make the payments on the loan. And then the U.S. would come in and said, well, we'll renegotiate the loan, but you must institute these policies. And that's how it was being done. That's another reason why those South American countries don't like us.
And on that program, the title of the program was CIA Secret Alliances, and you could find that on YouTube as well.
Okay.
And it's when you hear what you have to say and what that guy has to say, and he reads from the government's own documents, just like you do, and the information is so compelling, and you see that it's the same people that have been in power, and they're working to keep their monopolies, and they're focused on making their lives better at your expense.
Yep.
It's just shocking.
Yep. Well, it's not shocking. I mean, it's kind of business as usual, unfortunately. And
but it's at the expense of all the American people. And every time you turn around, everyone's saying, we have to go to war, and we have to turn the money wheel, and we have to make you poorer so that the people over here can be better. And it just seems like everything is misleading, and they have to tell a lie to sell a lie.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the reality is, I've come to understand over the last 20 years that I've been doing this, I've come to understand that the American people are as oblivious to the true nature of their government and the power elite as the medieval peasants were regarding the royalty and the Roman citizens regarding the emperors. We all know what absolute bozos they were. Nero, Caligula, and we look back in history and we see that, and now we're finding out because of the Jeffrey Epstein scandal, the Franklin scandal, the British pedophile scandal. It's the same thing going on. Just a bunch of greedy, power-mad people setting themselves up a government and then lying to the people to keep us in our place, keep us obedient, keep us working hard to give them more wealth. Well, only the trappings and labels and bunting changed.
I think that gradually the American people are starting to wake up.
I agree.
But it's only because there've been more and more stuff is being taken from them. And it's sad that you have to wake people up in that manner, to get them aware of their surroundings by making them homeless or taking their accounts and making them bankrupt, or, it just seems really sad that everyone's kind of, I don't know if it's...
Well, that's human nature. That's human nature. It's even in the Declaration of Independence. History has shown that people are more disposed to suffer while evils are sufferable. Okay? We'll put up with a certain amount of corruption and plunder going on as long as we're left enough to take care of our families and our homes, and we're not going to get into an argument. But unfortunately, the problem with money addiction is it knows no limits, and it always drives across that threshold where the people say, all right, this is beyond tolerance any longer. And that's when the guillotines come out.
And that was the basis for the Bill of Rights and the Constitution, correct?
Absolutely. The Founding Fathers knew that politics attracts the very sort of people who shouldn't be allowed into it, and they tried to create a government where authority and responsibility were spread over a wide body so that no one strong individual could hijack the nation. Unfortunately, over the last 150 years, we've allowed most of that to be stolen away from us.
Well, it seems like any time someone tries to have a peaceful protest, the machine guns come out and the SWAT gear comes out and the covered faces of the police. It just seems like there's a secret group, so to speak,
it's open repression. It's open repression of freedom of speech. They're going to be wagging machine guns at the protesters in New York. Bahrain is shooting their protesters as we speak. Anyway, we got to take a break for our news here. So, Joe, thank you very much for the phone call. We're going to let you go, and we'll be back after a few minutes. Aloha, America. Welcome back to our show, hour number 3. The phone lines are open, 877-300-7645, 877-300-7645. We are now hearing that the government in Kiev has agreed to a 2-day ceasefire in order to open a humanitarian corridor for civilians and non-combatants in Debaltsevo to basically leave the conflict area. Which sounds really good until you remember that Kiev didn't keep to the terms of the last ceasefire they supposedly agreed with. Now then, you've probably heard by now there's been a little bit of a whoopsie over at NBC. And it seems their anchor, Brian Williams, has, after these many years, been forced to acknowledge that he fibbed all the way back in 2003 when he claimed he was aboard a helicopter over Iraq that was hit by enemy fire and forced down. In fact, he was telling this story as recently as last week, and apparently somebody came out and said, look, I was on that helicopter, you weren't there. And last night, Williams read a statement apologizing for his false memory about this and being a little less than truthful about what was going on. But we are being reassured by the corporate media that despite this latest embarrassment, we can still trust them totally when they tell us that Saddam really had nuclear weapons, human activity is warming the earth, vaccines are safe, and all Muslims are evil. Now, speaking of embarrassments, we posted a little flashback to an article in the Telegraph where Hillary Clinton's story of coming under sniper fire in Bosnia turned out to be a little bit less than truthful. Let's see. Fox News, the ABC, the Food Lion scandal, remember that one? ABC producers wanted to harm the Food Lion supermarkets because they would not unionize. Sent in producers to get jobs in the supermarket undercover and created a presentation that showed that Food Lion was selling contaminated meat that had been dropped on the ground, then picked up and wrapped and put on the rack for sale, except it was ABC's people who were doing that. And Food Lion sued. They got the unedited tape that showed this was all being manufactured by the ABC producers. And it was one of the largest settlements by a news network in network news history. And the guy who was in charge of this segment at ABC not only did not lose his job, he went over to CNN. Remember the Fox News synthetic bovine growth hormone story? They assigned two of their best reporters to go on out and do a puff piece on what a great thing Monsanto's synthetic bovine growth hormone was. How it was making cattle grow faster and bigger and produce more food and more milk. And when these reporters looked into it, they began to discover a considerable amount of evidence that people who were eating the products from these cows were suffering strange medical ailments. And so Fox News asked them, for the sake of their Monsanto advertising revenue, to take that part of the story out. And these two reporters refused. And ultimately, Fox News fired them. Now, the reporters sued, and they initially won the lawsuit. It was an unjust firing. They hadn't done anything wrong. They'd tried to do the job the way they were supposed to do it. But the case was reversed on appeal when the courts ruled that because there is no law requiring the corporate media news broadcast to tell you the truth, management of corporate news can order their reporters to lie to you and fire them for refusing. And that tells you all you need to know about the American corporate news media. So, anyway. Now then, speaking of human-caused global warming, story out of AccuWeather.com. More snow in the offing for New England as storm ramps up at late week. Heavier coastal snow to hit New England. I got an email from somebody in Maine, says it's like living in a snow globe. I traded emails with some of my other family in New England. They're saying exactly the same thing. They've never seen it like this. It's just Arctic whiteout conditions here. February is already the 10th snowiest on record in Chicago, and it's only the 5th. Temperatures at Ann Arbor Airport hit minus 18 today. Amazing. Over in Sweden, they broke a decades-old snowfall record. Broke a record was set 50 years ago. Heavy snow forecast for peaks in Kanto, Koshin, Kinki regions. This is up in Japan. Heavy snow forecast for there. Snow has trapped 200 motorists in Spain. And apparently they were trapped for 17 hours overnight on roads between Cantabria and the province of Palencia. Apparently it's so cold that even Cumbrian Harbor is covered with ice. The sea is freezing, and that's salt water. It takes a lot of coal to freeze that. Temperatures plunging as low as 5 degrees below 0 centigrade. Now remember over at Greenland where they were saying, oh, the glaciers are melting, the ice cover is melting. Well, apparently Greenland is now approaching a record for snow mass gain. It's just piling on there. But the carbon Nazis aren't quitting. They want those carbon taxes. They want you to buy their carbon credits, and they're pulling out the star power now. Because apparently Arnold Schwarzenegger is now out there saying that he would be a terminator for climate change. He's over in India trying to get them to go along with that agenda. Arnold, that was the shark. That was the shark. You jumped right there. A little bit of news from the world of computers. It's beginning to look more and more like the FCC is going to reclassify the Internet as a utility, as a common carrier under Title II of the Telecommunications Act. And this basically guarantees the continuance of net neutrality. Everybody carries everybody else's traffic at equal priority. Now, obviously, the big ISPs and the media companies don't want that. They want to hog the lion's share of the bandwidth to themselves. And it's expected that Comcast, AT&T, and Verizon are going to try and go to court to reverse this. I have a better solution. Why don't we upgrade our Internet to the same bandwidth that we see in places like Japan, and then everybody gets what they want? But we're seeing this attitude here in the United States about, well, our Internet is old and it's not as fast as the rest of the world, and what we're going to do instead of improving the Internet is we're just going to try and give the lion's share of it to the big corporations. Why don't we just make the system better so there's no point in arguing who gets the most bandwidth? Japan has optical fiber into the home at the consumer level, gigabits per second delivery. Here in Hawaii, the maximum that you get at the consumer level in the home is 50 megabytes per second. And you have to pay extra for that. The modem will support 100, but here in Hawaii, it's just not there. No, let's not make things better. Let's just pay the lawyers to steal what little is left for our own use here. Alrighty, we're coming up on another commercial break. When we come back, we're going to be talking more about this whole vaccination thing. It is a huge push to get everybody to spend money on vaccines that are not working in the case of the flu and are proving more and more to be very dangerous. We'll be right back. Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. And before we get into the whole vaccine situation, I'm looking at this wonderful article over at Fairness and Accuracy in Reporting, and they're taking NBC News anchor Brian Williams' confession of having fibbed on the story of being shot down in Iraq and saying, well, you know, the fact of the matter is it isn't the only time Brian has been saying things that aren't exactly true. And they're going down the list about how back in 2013, Brian Williams claimed that Iran was suddenly claiming they don't want nuclear weapons. And that isn't what Iran was saying. Iran was saying, we're not working to manufacture a bomb. We don't believe in a nuclear bomb. And there's a whole bunch of them down here. And you might want to take a look at that article. And it's headlined, Some Other Tall Tales Brian Williams Might Want to Apologize For. I need to reprise a page I wrote about a lot of the documented frauds and deceptions we see coming out of the corporate media. And I don't want to be seen as bashing the corporate news, except that that's exactly what I'm doing. Because they are the ministry of propaganda for both government and corporations. And if there's one lesson you should all take away from this, it is that nobody is going to spend all that money for studios and broadcast equipment and mixer boards and lights and all the rest of it to give you the truth. They invest that money to turn that TV set, radio, newspaper, magazine into something to sell you an illusion, a real-life version of the Matrix. If you want the truth, you're going to have to hunt it down for yourself. And it is a lot of fun. You get good at it. There is nobody in the world you should trust more than yourself to decide what is going on in the world. Because we all make mistakes, we all get fed bogus stories, we all get tricked. And that's just a hard reality. I've got a good record for the last 20 years. It's not perfect. You need to become your own best analyst. And stop letting some hottie in a low top and a high skirt say, you know, we'll tell you what you need to think today. Vaccines are safe. Now then, speaking of vaccines. Story out of naturalnews.com. Mainstream media wages vile campaign of hate speech against unvaccinated children. They are really laying it on with a trowel. And he's, apparently they're commenting about a story that appeared in USA Today where Alex Berizzo, member of the paper's board of contributors, basically said the measles outbreak in California was preventable if everybody had had the vaccine. Well, remember, measles was eradicated in this country, was declared eradicated in 2000. And there were no cases as late as 2008. Where did it all come from? And I think the answer is we would not have had a measles outbreak in Disneyland or anywhere else if that southern border had been kept closed, or the people coming across it given medical quarantine examinations. Remember during the heyday of immigration to the United States of America, where all these people from Europe came across and they sailed past the Statue of Liberty? Do you think they just let them out on the shores of New York? Heck no. They all went to Ellis Island to have their paperwork processed and be given a medical examination. And everybody who was found to be harboring some kind of an illness was either put on a boat back home or kept in quarantine until they recovered. Is that not common sense precautions? But ever since this whole Obama immigration amnesty situation, these people are coming across the border and immediately thrown out all across the country. And it is not a coincidence that these illnesses, including measles, are popping up in the population centers where most of these illegals are going to, including California. All right, we're going to grab ourselves a phone call here. Glenn in Philadelphia. Aloha, Glenn. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind?
Hi, Mike. Just wanted to make a point about internet bandwidth. You overstated internet speeds by a factor of 8.
Okay.
You used megabytes instead of megabits. But what I really wanted to point out was I vividly remember the days of the mid-'90s of CompuServe and Prodigy and AOL and dial-up when Prodigy wanted to charge 10 cents per email message. And that went over like a lead balloon. And they eventually, improved and expanded things. But what annoys me is they keep telling us more and more bandwidth and, upping it. And we're going to make your upload speed as fast as your download. And it's just, but you know what? It's just like Charles' Law. The BS expands to fill the bandwidth available. And, they used to give text-friendly web pages or the ones with the pictures. But you can't even, CNN has modified its page. It takes forever to load, even with 20 megabit service. They put videos on there that you don't want and all sorts of pictures for ads. And they're just, if they would cut down on some of the damn clutter that doesn't really earn them advertising money, it wouldn't be so bad.
Okay, well, let me cut in here a second. First of all, back in the 60s and 70s, it was not unusual for computer time and access to be metered by the minute or by the CPU second. When I was working at JPL, and we wanted to run software on the 1108 timeshare system, it was billed by the CPU second. And at the end of the fiscal year, we all got to run our favorite toy programs to use up our budget so it wasn't cut for the next year. And I remember the very first time I telecommuted. I was working at Robert Abel & Associates, and I'd found an old VT52, and it had an acoustically coupled 300 baud modem. And I was able to sit in my home in North Hollywood and call into the computers down in Hollywood and check my renders remotely. And boy, I sure felt high tech back then. But But you're right about a lot of the bandwidth seems to be commandeered for the purposes of pushing a product. But some browsers actually have little switches you can put in there saying, "Don't load the images till I click on them. Don't load the videos till I click on them." We do know there are ad blocker tools out there, but now we're finding out that the big advertisers simply bribe these companies to let their product through the filter. And especially, and on top of which all the NSA spying, we're paying for all this bandwidth, and we get to use less and less of it for our own use because more and more of it's being commandeered to push products at us, to push propaganda at us, to spy on us, and it really is a very, very unpleasant situation.
Oh, yeah, and it was just the idea of loading videos as part of ads along the sidebar and stuff. I mean, what a pathetically ridiculous waste of bandwidth. Yeah, it's crazy.
It really is. But again, the solution is gigabit into the home, like they've got in places like Japan. We got to take a break for commercials. Thank you for the call, Glenn. We'll be right back.
Take care.
Hi, America. Welcome back to the show here. I'm looking at an email from a listener in Metro Detroit. The temperature reached a high of 18 degrees Fahrenheit. It is now 1 degree. That's cold. So much for Al Gore. All right, getting on to the topic of vaccines. Another article over at Newsmax Health. Are too many vaccines destroying kids' immune systems? And this is a topic that has been brought up before, that all these vaccines don't actually boost immunity. They basically weaken the body's own natural immune systems. And that video I made, What Are They Thinking? Not too long ago, is already outdated. The CDC recommends that children get 49 doses of 14 different vaccines before the age of 6 and 69 doses by the age of 18. Children today are getting 3 times as many vaccinations as kids were back when I was born. Actually, it's more than that. I only ever got 2 vaccinations when I was a kid. One was for smallpox and one was for polio. That's it. But you need to understand something fundamental about America's medical industrial complex. If we were all healthy, they'd be broke. And I'm not saying that somebody is sitting in a dark room somewhere saying we need to deliberately make people sick. But subconsciously, it's working to influence their decision making. They need America to be chronically ill. You're a guaranteed source of revenue. Nobody's looking for cures. They want treatments. If you come down with a disease and they cure you, you're gone. That's it. If you come down with a disease and they're treating you month after month after month after month, then you are a guaranteed flow of income for the rest of your life, or until you run out of money, whichever comes first. Another story out of the Daily Mail in Great Britain acknowledging that the flu vaccine is a waste of time for 97% of patients because it takes a year to develop the current flu vaccine, and during that time, flu mutates. And CDC acknowledges they've admitted the current flu shot, which they're still telling people to get, is ineffective against the current flu. And emergency rooms all across the country are reporting there's a flood of flu patients coming in who had the flu vaccine who are still getting the flu. We're going to grab a phone call here. Clint in Las Vegas. Aloha, Clint. Welcome to the show. What's on your mind? Clint, there you are.
Mike. Hey, I just sent you an email of the measles, the MMR, the insert PDF, the insert that has the adverse reactions on page 6 and page 8. Some of them are pretty bad, like death.
Yes.
And I sent it to you, and I put on the email Clint from Las Vegas measles PDF. And I just sent it to you just now.
I've got it here, and as a matter of fact, we did post it in its entirety on the website earlier this week. And, you know, this stuff isn't mentioned in the commercials. It's not mentioned by your doctor. You have to ask the doctor for the package insert for any medication to read what its adverse effects are. And it's in microscopically tiny print, so you got to take a magnifying glass with you.
Yeah, well, to the manufacturer's credit, it doesn't claim to give you an erection for 4 hours. So,
okay.
Can I give you a personal medical story about vaccines and all that?
Sure, real quick.
Okay, I used to get chronic bronchitis. I used to dread winter because I catch a cold and then a cough would settle in that would last, up to 2 months. I mean, just horrible coughs. And I've kept building up my arsenal like Lyphosuric C, and that really helped with the duration of the coughs and all that. But I drifted in because family members have got cancer, and thanks to some of your stuff, I ran into Dr. Max Gerson's treatment. And this might help some people out there, maybe not. But I got to say, between the lowering of the meat, the juicing, and I'll say right on air, the coffee enemas, that seemed to be the straw that broke the camel's back. I am now working on a job with hundreds of people who are sick. They're sneezing and coughing on me, and for the first time in my life, I'm not getting colds.
Well, that's good to hear, and of course, the reason the big pharmaceutical companies don't like natural methods is they can't patent them, and they can't have market exclusivity and sell them at a huge markup. And it was really kind of a giggle because they've been bashing nanosilver all this time, and now, and all of a sudden, you know, they're starting to say, well, you know, we've discovered, you know, for the antibiotic resistant pathogens, that if we add nanosilver to our antibiotics, suddenly they start working, and they're trying to hijack nanosilver and add it to their product and charge a huge price for it. And they absolutely do not want you to make it for your own or buy it. FDA's coming down hard on anybody selling nanosilver claiming that it has any kind of curative properties. And for those of us who make our own, of course, the next step will be that it'll be illegal to dispense nanosilver without a doctor's prescription. I mean, it really is getting ridiculous out there.
Oh, did I mention Max Gerson's treatment? It's cheap. It's real cheap.
Yep.
And it works. And I don't know how they're going to outlaw coffee. I thought it was ridiculous at first, but when you go into the science of it, it makes a lot of sense. It's detoxing your liver, your pancreas, your body works better. Your immune system is charged up. Well,
you know, no offense. I'm going to continue to administer coffee the traditional way. You know, where gravity's my friend. Okay. All right, I'm going to let you go here. Thank you very much for the phone call, and we're going to let you go here. Getting on back to the vaccine situation here. Apparently, Anderson Cooper spoke with former U.S. Congressman Dan Burton, who chaired several hearings on vaccine and autism, where Congress did absolutely nothing, because they get very big campaign checks from the big pharmaceutical corporations. But now that he's out of public life and a private citizen, he says, yeah, vaccines are linked to autism. Now, we have another story linked from whatreallyhappened.com. We mentioned it earlier in the show. This is over at Natural News, and they're talking about data provided by the CDC itself, saying that nobody has died from measles in more than 10 years, while at least 108 deaths reported to the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System have been linked to the measles vaccines. The measles vaccine is killing 100 times more people. Well, it's infinite. The vaccine kills more people than the disease does. It's a repeat of 1976 all over again. Now, we're talking about this CDC whistleblower who went public about how the CDC engaged in fraud for their study to claim that there was no link between vaccines and autism. He's now been granted immunity in order to testify before Congress, Dr. William Thompson, and now he's come out saying that their original raw data did show a link between mercury-based preservatives like thimerosal and autism. What kind of a government and corporate culture do we have where it's okay to sell something harmful to the public as long as it's making money? That's where we are right now. And it's very dangerous. We have them, like 1 in 88 U.S. kids is now autistic. We'll be right back. Aloha, America. Welcome back to the show here. Now, as I mentioned before I went to the commercial break, the current statistic is now 1 out of every 88 American children are suffering autism. 1 out of 88. That is a scandal. It's just an amazing number of kids who are dealing with these problems. Now, over in Chicago, there's an organization called Home First Medical Services, and they treat a lot of children. Some are vaccinated, some are not. And Dr. Mayer Eisenstein has been keeping track of the health of the non-vaccinated children, the never vaccinated children. And he's basically looking at these kids whose parents received exemptions from vaccination through Illinois' rather loose immunization policy. Now, you know, they're already trying to reverse that. Out in California, they're looking at legislation to remove the personal belief exemption. We don't care what you believe. We demand that we stick this needle in your kid's arm, unless you can prove that the vaccine is going to kill him dead. Well, you don't know that until after the vaccine's already there, and it's already too late. So this Dr. Eisenstein has been tracking the health of the never vaccinated children, and he's never found one with autism. Not one. The Amish do not vaccinate for religious reasons. They don't have an autism problem. One of the talking heads on the media the other day was trying to say, well, the Amish don't get autism because they don't socialize with other children. Autism is not a contagious illness. It's a toxic reaction. Now, we're dealing with this CDC whistleblower who's come out to say that the approved CDC report that said there was no link between vaccines and autism was a fraud. There was another study called the Danish study that was the foundation of the vaccine industry's claim there's no relationship between vaccines and autism. The author of that study, Paul Thorson, was indicted for fraud over the study, and an arrest warrant has been issued. He's now in hiding. Now, the reason for this vaccine push is because the major drug patents on their name brand, cash cow medications are running out. They're going to go generic, and that means the flow of money is slowing down to a trickle. And vaccines, selling medicines to perfectly healthy people who may not need it, is the profitable answer. And selling medicines to perfectly healthy people that actually make them sick again is an even better profit margin. Up in Canada, they did a study which documented at least 60 cases of Canadian girls experiencing debilitating complications after the Gardasil vaccine. And what we're hearing from the pharmaceutical companies is, oh, come on now, 60. You're just being so picky. It's a numbers game for them. They'll put out a product that sells millions of units, maybe kills a few hundred, and they figure they'll just pay off the few hundred, and they're still making profits. That's the way they think. And you can't sue a vaccine maker in this country. They're protected by law. You have to go through this special vaccine court, which is on the side of the vaccine makers, because they don't want to have to pay out unless it's an ironclad, no-question case of perfectly healthy kid gets vaccine and falls over. Story out of PrisonPlanet.com, a case where a woman contracted polio by changing the diapers on her child who had been given the polio vaccine. And the doctors tried to say it was the mother's fault. Oh, she's immune deficient. Really, it's all her own fault. And then the mother came out with her health and medical records, which showed she'd never been sick in her life. There's so much money involved that government and corporate media are going to bend over backward to protect the money, worship the money. No sacrifice is too great for the money. And the money depends on the American people being chronically sick all the time, chronically requiring treatment for something, even if it's made up. We're treating you for attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Now, despite recent headlines about victory against Ebola in Africa, the news is turning the other way. The World Health Organization announced yesterday that cases in all three of West Africa's worst-hit countries have started to go up again. The number of new cases is rising over there, so we've got to keep an eye on that. Meanwhile, over in Wales, they have followed Scotland and voted in favor of a moratorium on fracking until the full health and environmental impacts are properly studied and fully understood, which includes toxic fracking fluid contamination of farmland, drinking water, lakes, streams, and ponds where fish are being killed. And, of course, the possibility of triggering earthquakes in an area with a lot of fault systems left over from the last ice age here. All right. Here's an interesting story, a little bit of a lighter line. This is from The Guardian here. And apparently authorities within the Vatican have discovered caches of child porn. Pictures of children being abused in a pedophilic manner. And Gian Piero Milano, who's the Vatican's promoter of justice, has said, yeah. Now, they're not naming who was caught with the child porn, but it's there. And for those of you who think I'm only picking on the Catholics, there's this very interesting story that came out of The Guardian also, where this rabbi was allowed to keep teaching after admitting abuse of children. And apparently the father and the victims, the father of the victims and the victims themselves, were openly discouraged from going to the police because, they would suffer. The rabbis would suffer. Oh, you don't want to do that here. And meanwhile, over here in the United States of America, very interesting story. Remember Trinity Broadcasting, the nation's largest Christian broadcasting network. The former chief financial officer has filed a lawsuit against Trinity Broadcasting because apparently they wanted to do a $100 million distribution to themselves. That was unlawful. Just loot the money out of Trinity Broadcasting, put it in their pocket. She objected, and they threatened to kill her, held her at gunpoint if she didn't go along and sign the relevant paperwork. She was then dismissed, and now she's filed a lawsuit. Supreme moral authority, my astrolabe, as it were. More children are continuing to take pictures of the Michelle Obama lunches. And again, you know you live in a dictatorship when the dictator's wife decides what your children are going to eat for lunch. And they look horrible. I think prisoners get better food than these school children. What are they doing to our kids with this horrible diet? Getting them conditioned to accept the new generation of manufactured food products for the New World Order, I guess. All right. Let's see. Monsanto's Roundup system threatens extinction of the monarch butterflies. Well, we've kind of known that one all along. And finally, from the world of the Big Bang. Apparently, one of the radio signals that was detected and held up as proof of the cosmic Big Bang has now been admitted to be just interstellar debris in the galaxy. So, all right, there's the music. Time for me to get out of here, get some animation work done. We will be back tomorrow, Friday, here on the Genesis Communication Network. Until then, stay informed, stay skeptical, make good choices. Go ahead and get angry. Now's the time to do it. Please support Genesis Broadcasting. Please support WhatReallyHappened.com. We're right on the edge here. Share what you know with everybody you know. We'll be back tomorrow. Aloha, America.